Maddie Hayes glanced at the clock for what felt like the 100th time that morning, her heart racing in tandem with the second hand. She was late. Again. Olivia, her best friend and self-appointed matchmaker, had insisted that this blind date was destined, and Maddie, ever the optimist despite her record of clumsy misadventures, had reluctantly agreed. Pulling her hair into a hasty ponytail, she tried to smooth the wrinkles from her cream blouse, only to knock over her half-empty cup of coffee. Dark liquid seeped into the fabric and onto the counter, leaving a stark, spreading stain. Maddie cursed under her breath, grabbing a towel and frantically patting at the mess, but the stain was stubborn, much like her morning routine. Meanwhile, across town, Cameron Pierce tapped his designer watch impatiently. He had agreed to this blind date with a mix of curiosity and mild skepticism. At 40, Cameron was used to controlling every aspect of his life, his schedule, his business empire, and even his social circle. But blind dates were unpredictable. He had arrived early at the upscale restaurant Olivia had recommended, dressed sharply in a tailored navy suit, expecting an evening of polite conversation at best. He prided himself on discernment, and yet, somewhere deep down, a small voice whispered that this encounter might be different. Maddie cursed again, this time for being trapped in indecision. She could follow the usual safe route to the restaurant, taking clean streets and sidewalks, or she could cut through the nearby park to save time. The park route was muddy. Recent rains had left the paths slick with glistening pools and patches of thick, clinging mud. But time was running out, and Maddie's optimism often overrode her caution. Snatching her handbag and locking the apartment door behind her, she set off toward the park, hoping for a shortcut that might just save her from arriving late. The park was deceptively serene. Bare trees stretched toward the sky, their branches slick with lingering drops of rain, and a faint scent of damp earth filled the air. Maddie picked her steps carefully, trying to avoid the puddles, but fate had other plans. Her foot slipped on a hidden patch of mud, and she flailed, arms windmilling wildly. She landed with a splash, her clean blouse smeared, and her shoes coated in thick brown sludge. Heart pounding, she sat up, surveying the damage, and groaned. Calling Olivia on her cell, Maddie's voice trembled with panic. "Leave. I'm a mess. I look like I've wrestled a swamp." On the other end, Olivia's voice was calm but firm. "Maddie, breathe. Own it. Walk in there like you planned this." Confidence covers a lot of mud. Maddie inhaled sharply, trying to channel Olivia's assurance. She brushed at her blouse with trembling hands, though the effort barely made a dent in the stains. Looking at herself in the reflection of a puddle, she barely recognized the person staring back. Her hair plastered to her forehead, her shoes caked in brown, her clothes a chaotic canvas of the morning's misadventures. But there was no time for self-pity. She took a deep breath and continued toward the restaurant, determination propelling her forward despite the mess. The restaurant. Cameron shifted in his seat, the polished oak of the table beneath his hands contrasting with the anxious flutter in his chest. He had checked the time once, twice, then 3 times. The city outside had started to dim with the soft glow of evening lights, and he had almost convinced himself that Maddie wouldn't show. Rising to leave, he paused, glancing at the entrance just as the door swung open. There she was, or rather, a figure in disheveled clothes, mud streaked across her blouse and shoes. For a split second, his instinct was to turn away, perhaps even walk out. The sight was unexpected, but then he saw her eyes, wide and anxious, meeting his. There was a spark of vulnerability and earnestness that made Cameron pause. Her messy appearance suddenly seemed irrelevant, overshadowed by a presence that was quietly magnetic. He noticed the way she straightened her shoulders, attempting to regain composure despite the chaos of her appearance. Something about her, the unpolished authenticity, the hint of humor in her slightly crooked smile, made Cameron hesitate, reconsidering the judgment he would have otherwise passed in a heartbeat. Maddie stepped fully into the restaurant, her shoes squelching slightly against the polished floor. Her hands clutched her handbag like a lifeline, and she swallowed hard, forcing a smile that trembled at the edges. "Hi," she said, voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying a note of hopeful defiance. Cameron's gaze softened as he gestured to the chair across from him. "Please," he said, his voice calm, even, but with an undercurrent of curiosity. "Seed." As Maddie eased herself into the chair, still acutely aware of the mud on her clothes, Cameron studied her more closely, not in judgment, but in fascination. This was not the carefully curated persona he expected to meet. This was real, raw, unfiltered. And for reasons he couldn't yet articulate, it made him pause and lean forward, subtly, drawn in despite himself. The waiter arrived, taking orders in a practiced, neutral tone, but Cameron barely registered the menu. His attention was fixed on Maddie, the way she fidgeted slightly, the nervous laugh that escaped her lips when she knocked her glass slightly off-center, and the way she looked at him with a mixture of embarrassment and courage. Maddie, for her part, felt every ounce of his gaze, and though anxiety gnawed at her, there was also a flicker of hope. Perhaps this disaster of a day could turn into something memorable after all. The first words were exchanged, tentative, awkward, yet tinged with humor and warmth. Cameron found himself smiling despite his better judgment, and Maddie laughed despite the lingering tension in her chest. There was a rhythm forming, fragile but undeniable, as two people who should have been strangers began to navigate the strange terrain of first impressions, chaos, and unexpected attraction as the evening settled around them. The restaurant buzzing faintly with ambient conversation, both Maddie and Cameron realized, in quiet, unspoken ways, that this blind date was already unlike any they had imagined. One glance had been enough to ignite curiosity, one shared laugh enough to plant the seed of connection. And though the mud clung stubbornly to Maddie's blouse, and her shoes squelched softly with every movement, it was the way she carried herself, despite the chaos, that held Cameron's attention, and made him wonder what surprises this night still had in store. Cameron settled back in his chair, momentarily letting his gaze wander over Maddie, still faintly flustered from her chaotic entrance. The restaurant's soft lighting cast shadows across the polished tables, but it did little to hide the mud smeared across her blouse or the damp strands of hair clinging to her forehead. He had expected an awkward encounter, perhaps polite small talk, cautious smiles, and a quiet desire to escape early. But instead, he found himself intrigued. There was something undeniably genuine about Maddie, a warmth that seemed to radiate despite the evidence of her morning disaster. Maddie cleared her throat and laughed lightly, a sound that was half embarrassment, half amusement. "I promise, I usually don't arrive looking like this," she said, gesturing vaguely to the ruined fabric of her blouse. Cameron's lips quirked into a small, amused smile. "I've never had someone make such a dramatic entrance before," he admitted, his tone teasing but not unkind. It was the kind of observation that made Maddie's pulse quicken, not condescending, but appreciative in a way that invited her to relax. As the waiter moved on to other tables, Maddie's nervous energy began to settle, replaced by a tentative confidence. She found herself opening up about her life with a mix of humor and sincerity. She spoke of her job at a small design studio, her love for painting in the quiet hours of the morning, and her recent attempt at training for a half marathon, a plan derailed by her ever-present clumsiness. Each story was punctuated by little mishaps, minor disasters that could have embarrassed someone else, but Maddie told them with a self-deprecating charm that made Cameron lean in, listening with genuine interest. Cameron, in turn, shared glimpses of his world, carefully measured yet revealing enough to create a sense of intimacy. He spoke of his company, the weight of responsibility, and the subtle loneliness that came with wealth. He didn't speak of material luxury or social status. Instead, he revealed the quiet moments of doubt and pressure that often went unnoticed by the public eye. Maddie listened attentively, her head tilting slightly as she processed each word. Her own laughter and empathy encouraged him, and for the first time in months, Cameron felt unguarded. The conversation flowed naturally, punctuated by shared glances and subtle gestures. Cameron caught her hands brushing nervously against the edge of the table, and Maddie noticed the way he leaned slightly forward when he laughed, the warmth in his dark eyes betraying the carefully composed exterior. Neither spoke directly about the growing tension, but it was there, a quiet pull, a curiosity that neither could fully explain. The mud on Maddie's clothes, once an embarrassment, now seemed almost symbolic of her resilience. She had shown up in spite of the chaos, and Cameron couldn't help but respect that. Halfway through their meal, Maddie spilled a small drop of wine on the tablecloth. Her eyes widened, and she opened her mouth to apologize, but Cameron waved her off with a small smile. "It's fine," he said, though his gaze lingered on her with a mixture of amusement and admiration. "Honestly, I think it suits you." Maddie blinked, unsure if he meant the wine, her mud-streaked appearance, or her ability to navigate mishaps with grace. She laughed again, the tension in her shoulders easing. There was something about Cameron's approach, patient, slightly teasing, yet sincerely attentive, that allowed her to lower her defenses. At T1 point, Maddie glanced at her phone to see a message from Olivia. "How's it going? Don't embarrass yourself." She rolled her eyes at her friend's blunt tone, but couldn't help smiling. Olivia didn't understand the nuances of the moment. The quiet connection forming, the unspoken understanding between two people who, by chance, had collided in a messy, chaotic way. Maddie typed a quick reply. Choosing her words carefully, better than expected, she returned the phone to her bag and looked up, meeting Cameron's gaze. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was comfortable, charged with curiosity. Their conversation gradually shifted to lighter, more playful topics, favorite books, childhood memories, and odd hobbies. Maddie discovered that Cameron had a secret fondness for old jazz records, a collection he rarely mentioned. Cameron learned that Maddie could quote lines from classic films with surprising precision, often inserting herself into the dialogue for comedic effect. Each exchange chipped away at the initial barriers between them, revealing layers of personality and shared humor. The mud, the spilled coffee, the chaos of the morning, all of it faded into the background as they connected on a level neither had anticipated. Yet, even as the atmosphere grew warmer, a subtle tension remained. Cameron's phone buzzed briefly, a message from Tyler Grant, a business associate. "Don't get distracted. Remember the dinner tonight." Cameron's thumb hovered over the screen, a brief frown passing across his face. Maddie noticed, curiosity flickering in her eyes, but she didn't press. The moment felt delicate, balanced between potential intimacy and outside interference. Cameron slipped the phone back into his pocket, choosing instead to remain present. The decision, small as it seemed, spoke volumes to Maddie. He was choosing to invest his attention in her. In this messy, unpredictable evening, as dessert was cleared away. Cameron leaned back slightly, studying Maddie with an expression that was hard to read. There was intrigue, certainly, and an unmistakable attraction, but there was also a careful assessment, a subtle weighing of compatibility and intent. Maddie, sensing his gaze, felt a mix of nervousness and anticipation. She had no way of knowing whether this evening would lead to anything beyond the table where they now sat. Yet there was a quiet hope, fragile but persistent, that something real might be forming. The waiter returned with the check, unobtrusively placing it at the edge of the table. Maddie and Cameron both reached for it, hands brushing, a fleeting moment that elicited an almost imperceptible smile from both. Cameron cleared his throat, a small laugh escaping. "I have to admit," he said, voice low, "this has been unexpectedly enjoyable." Maddie's chest warmed at the words, a blush creeping over her cheeks. "Me too," she replied softly, the honesty in her tone resonating in the space between them as they rose from the table. Cameron held the door for Maddie, and she stepped out into the evening air, still slightly damp but emboldened by the connection they had shared. Mud and all, she had navigated the chaos and come out the other side, and Cameron, surprisingly, felt a sense of curiosity and anticipation he hadn't experienced in years. The night was far from over, and both understood, in unspoken agreement, that this encounter was only the beginning of something neither had expected, but both were quietly eager to explore. Cameron walked Maddie to the edge of the street, the cool evening air brushing against their faces, carrying the faint scent of rain-soaked pavement. The glow of the streetlights reflected in puddles around their feet, and for a moment, it felt like the world had narrowed to just the two of them. Maddie's mud-streaked shoes squelched softly with each step, a subtle reminder of the morning's chaos, but she no longer seemed self-conscious. She had settled into a rhythm of conversation with Cameron, and for the first time, she felt genuinely seen. "I can't believe you survived the park," Cameron said, shaking his head with a small, amused smile. "Most people would have called it quits halfway through." Maddie laughed, the sound light and easy, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You have no idea," she admitted. "I've got a talent for turning ordinary days into, well, messes. But somehow, I think you might find that entertaining." Cameron's lips curved slightly, eyes softening. "I already do," he said simply, but his tone carried more weight than the word suggested. It was a rare compliment from someone usually guarded, and Maddie felt a warmth bloom in her chest. The moment was interrupted by Cameron's phone vibrating in his pocket. He glanced at the screen and frowned slightly. Tyler Grant, his business associate, sending a reminder about the evening's work dinner. Cameron sighed, hesitating. "I have to go to a business dinner," he said, trying to mask the reluctant edge in his voice. Maddie's smile faltered just slightly. "Oh," she said softly, hiding the disappointment that tugged at her. "I guess that's important." Cameron looked at her, torn. He didn't want to leave this. The conversation, the connection, but duty had its demands. "I wish I didn't have to," Cameron admitted, his voice low. "I was enjoying this." His eyes searched hers, and Maddie noticed a subtle vulnerability beneath the polished exterior he normally maintained. "This was unexpected," he continued. "You've got a way of making a messy day feel lighter." Maddie's heart skipped, the sincerity in his words piercing through her earlier anxieties. "I guess we both stumbled into something," she replied, half joking, half serious. There was humor in her voice, but it was layered with honesty and curiosity, an acknowledgement of the unspoken connection forming between them. As Cameron hailed a cab, Maddie's thoughts swirled. She walked beside him in silence for a moment, feeling the tension between hope and uncertainty. She wanted to ask if he'd come back, if this was going somewhere, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she focused on the quiet rhythm of their steps and the faint warmth radiating from his side. Cameron, noticing her quiet contemplation, reached out instinctively, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. The gesture was brief, almost accidental, yet it carried a tenderness that neither of them could ignore. Once the cab arrived, Cameron hesitated before opening the door. Maddie could see the conflict in his eyes, part duty, part desire to stay. He handed her a card with his phone number scrawled neatly across it, his usual precision contrasting with the informality of the gesture. "Call me," he said simply, "when you're ready." Maddie accepted the card with a shy smile, her fingers brushing his for just a moment longer than necessary. There was an unspoken promise in that brief contact, a suggestion that this encounter was far from over. The cab pulled away, leaving Maddie standing on the curb, the evening air cool against her skin. She stared after the vehicle, card clutched in her hand, feeling a mixture of exhilaration and apprehension. Her mind replayed the evening in fragments, the awkward spills, the laughter, the unanticipated depth in Cameron's eyes. She realized that for the first time in a long while, someone had seen her as she truly was, imperfect, impulsive, and undeniably authentic. Meanwhile, Cameron sat back in the cab, glancing at the blurred city lights outside. His thoughts kept returning to Maddie, the way she had navigated chaos with humor, the sincerity in her laughter, and the brief touch of her hand as they parted. He was supposed to attend a dinner filled with formalities, small talk, and strategic conversation, yet all he could think about was her. A pang of guilt mixed with longing. He was drawn to her authenticity, something rare in his carefully curated world. He realized, with a flicker of clarity, that this connection might be worth bending the rules of expectation. As he arrived at the business dinner, Cameron was greeted with polite smiles and carefully chosen words. Yet his mind wandered, replaying Maddie's expressions, her awkward charm, the honest warmth she radiated despite the muddy chaos of the day. His associate, Tyler, leaned in briefly with a raised eyebrow, commenting on Maddie's suitability. Cameron offered a neutral smile, deflecting the remark, but internally he bristled. He didn't care what Tyler or anyone else thought. Something about Maddie had unsettled the predictable rhythm of his life in the most compelling way. Back in her apartment, Maddie sank onto the couch, exhausted yet exhilarated. She reflected on the evening, the unpredictable mix of embarrassment, humor, and genuine connection that had defined it. Her phone buzzed, a message from Olivia. "So, he like you, right?" Maddie typed back quickly, a small smile forming. "I think maybe." The words felt tentative but honest, capturing the cautious hope she allowed herself to feel. She knew that a single evening, no matter how extraordinary, didn't guarantee a storybook ending. But for the first time in months, she felt a quiet certainty that something worth exploring had begun. Hours later, Cameron left the dinner early, making a decision that surprised even him. He didn't return to the cab immediately, but walked slowly, the city streets glistening with the remnants of earlier rain. Every thought was filled with Maddie, the way she had laughed at herself, the subtle spark of vulnerability she had shared, and the courage she had shown in arriving, messy and imperfect, to meet someone unknown. He realized that he wanted to see her again, to know her beyond the initial encounter, to explore the connection that had defied expectation. As the night deepened, both Maddie and Cameron were caught in the same quiet anticipation. One had the card clutched in her hand, the other replaying every detail of their meeting. The city slept around them, yet in their separate spaces, the night was alive with possibility. Attention lingered, fragile yet undeniable, hinting that the next encounter could change everything. And though neither could predict the course ahead, both were aware that the evening had already left an indelible mark, a subtle promise of intimacy, challenge, and connection that neither was willing to ignore. The night air was crisp as Maddie sat by her apartment window, the faint hum of the city below filling the quiet space. She traced the edges of the card Cameron had given her, the numbers and letters scrawled neatly across its surface, a tangible reminder of the evening's improbable events. Her mind replayed each moment, the awkward spills, the laughter, the way Cameron had leaned in when she shared a story, eyes attentive, intrigued. Despite the chaos of her arrival and the lingering stain on her blouse, she had felt seen, genuinely seen, in a way that few people ever made her feel that a soft knock at her door pulled her from thought. Her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't expecting anyone. Slowly, she approached and peeked through the peephole. Cameron stood there, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers, flowers that looked freshly picked, slightly uneven, and entirely unpretentious. Her chest tightened, a mixture of surprise and anticipation washing over her. She opened the door, her hand still trembling slightly, and he smiled, that familiar warmth in his dark eyes. "I know this is sudden," Cameron began, his voice calm but carrying a subtle urgency. "But I couldn't let the evening end without seeing you again." Maddie blinked, caught off guard by his presence, by the sincerity etched across his face. "You came back?" she asked, almost whispering. He nodded, extending the flowers toward her. "I realized that leaving you after tonight didn't feel right. I wanted to make sure you knew how much I enjoyed your company and how curious I am to see where this goes." Maddie felt a blush rise to her cheeks, her earlier insecurities about mud-stained clothes and awkward laughter fading under the weight of his attention. She stepped aside to let him in, the door closing softly behind him. They moved toward the living room, shoes squeaking faintly against the hardwood floor. Cameron placed the bouquet on the coffee table, the flowers a simple but intimate gesture that spoke volumes about his intent. Maddie sank onto the couch, smoothing her blouse despite the lingering stains, feeling a nervous excitement coursing through her. Cameron remained standing for a moment, hesitating as though choosing his words with care. "I want to be honest," he said finally, taking a seat across from her. "I'm not usually impulsive, especially with people I barely know. But tonight, something about you, it's different. You're real, Maddie. You don't pretend, you don't hide behind perfection, and it's refreshing. Maddie's lips curved into a tentative smile, her chest warming at the admission. I was afraid, she confessed softly, that my messy entrance would make you think less of me. Cameron leaned forward slightly, his hands resting loosely on his knees. It made me think more of you, he said simply, his gaze steady. It showed me you're not afraid to be yourself, even in uncomfortable situations. That kind of courage is rare. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, the air between them charged with unspoken understanding. Maddie felt a weight lift off her shoulders, the anxiety that had accompanied her all evening dissipating in the warmth of Cameron's presence. The city outside continued its quiet rhythm, but in her apartment, time seemed to stretch, allowing two people to exist solely in each other's company. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, yet each word, each glance, carried a subtle intimacy. Maddie found herself laughing more freely than she had in months, sharing small stories about her childhood, her favorite books, and the odd mishaps that seemed to follow her everywhere. Cameron listened intently, occasionally chuckling or shaking his head in disbelief, but always with an expression of genuine interest. The barriers between them continued to dissolve, replaced by a delicate but undeniable connection. Eventually, Cameron's eyes softened, and he spoke with a gentleness that made Maddie's heart flutter. I know this may sound sudden, but I want to see you again, he said, his voice low, steady. Not just tonight. I want to know you, really know you. And I want to be honest with you. I'm willing to take the risk if you are. Maddie swallowed, emotions swirling, a mixture of excitement and cautious hope. She had spent too long guarding herself against disappointment. Yet something in Cameron's words, in his presence, made her believe that perhaps this risk was worth taking. I'd like that, Maddie said finally, her voice quiet but firm. She felt a rush of relief and anticipation, a sense of possibility blooming where uncertainty had once lingered. Cameron smiled, a small, satisfied curve of his lips, and reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face in a gesture that was both tender and careful. Maddie's eyes met his, and for the first time that evening, there was no awkwardness, no hesitation, only a shared recognition that they were stepping into something neither had expected, yet both were eager to explore. As the night continued, they moved toward the small balcony overlooking the city, the lights twinkling below like scattered stars. Cameron stood close, yet not imposing, allowing Maddie to feel the warmth of his presence without pressure. She leaned against the railing, the cool metal grounding her, and for a moment, they simply watched the quiet cityscape, the unspoken words between them carrying more weight than any conversation could. It was a moment of peace, intimacy, and mutual understanding, fragile yet profound. Before leaving, Cameron turned to Maddie, his expression a mixture of sincerity and gentle mischief. Next time, he said with a playful lift of his brow, I promise to try not to let anything as dramatic as mud get in the way of our meeting. Maddie laughed, the sound bright and genuine, the tension of the evening fully dissipating. I'll hold you to that, she replied, her smile reflecting both amusement and anticipation. As Cameron departed into the night, Maddie watched him go, feeling a quiet certainty that something rare and meaningful had begun. The mud, the spills, the chaos of the morning, it had all led to this. And in that messy, imperfect, utterly human moment, she realized that connection, curiosity, and courage could turn even the most disastrous day into the start of something extraordinary. The night had ended, but the story, theirs to write together, was only just beginning.